Welcome to this Psychology Study podcast. Today we are reviewing the most important topics for Psychology Partial 1. Let's start with the basics. Psychology is the scientific study of human behavior and mental processes. Behavior refers to observable actions, such as speaking, walking, or reacting to situations. Mental processes are internal activities, including thoughts, emotions, memory, and perception. Psychology has four main goals. The first goal is to describe behavior. This means observing and identifying what people do. The second goal is to explain behavior. Psychologists try to understand why behaviors happen. The third goal is to predict behavior. This means anticipating how people may act in certain situations. The fourth goal is to control or influence behavior. Psychologists use their knowledge to create positive changes. Now let's talk about the different areas of psychology. Clinical psychology focuses on diagnosing and treating mental, emotional, and behavioral disorders. Counseling psychology helps people with personal growth, everyday problems, and life decisions. Educational psychology studies learning, teaching methods, and educational systems. School psychology helps students with academic and emotional difficulties. Developmental psychology studies changes throughout human life. Social psychology studies how people behave in groups and how society influences behavior. Experimental psychology studies basic psychological processes through scientific research. Now, let's review the history of psychology. Before psychology became a science, it was connected to philosophy. Socrates focused on self-knowledge. His famous phrase was, "Know thyself." Plato believed that the mind and body were separate. Aristotle studied behavior through observation. Hippocrates connected behavior with biological processes. Psychology became a science in 1879 in Leipzig, Germany. Wilhelm Wundt created the first psychology laboratory. Because of this, he is known as the father of scientific psychology. Now, let's review the classical schools of psychology. Structuralism was developed by Wilhelm Wundt and Edward Titchener. Its main idea was that consciousness could be divided into basic elements. The main method was introspection, which means analyzing personal conscious experiences. Functionalism was developed by William James and John Dewey. It focused on how mental processes help people adapt to their environment. Behaviorism was developed by John Watson and B.F. Skinner. Behaviorists believed psychology should study observable behavior. They also believed that behavior is learned through conditioning. Gestalt psychology was developed by Wertheimer, Köhler, and Kafka. Its main idea was that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Psychoanalysis was created by Sigmund Freud. Freud believed that behavior is influenced by the unconscious mind and childhood experiences. Now, let's review contemporary perspectives. The biological perspective explains that behavior is influenced by the brain, nervous system, and genetics. The humanistic perspective explains that people have free will and can make conscious choices. The cognitive perspective focuses on thoughts, memory, and problem solving. The sociocultural perspective explains that behavior is influenced by culture, society, and social experiences. The learning perspective explains that behavior is learned through conditioning and observation. Now, let's review research methods. Naturalistic observation means observing behavior in a natural environment. Laboratory observation means studying behavior in a controlled environment. A case study is a detailed investigation of one person or a small group. Psychological testing uses tests to measure abilities, personality, or other characteristics. Correlation studies relationships between variables. However, remember this important idea. Correlation does not prove causation. A relationship between two things does not mean that one thing causes the other. A positive correlation means both variables increase or decrease together. For example, more studying can be related to better grades. A negative correlation means one variable increases while the other decreases. For example, less money can be related to less motivation. The experimental method is used to study cause and effect. The independent variable is changed by the researcher. The dependent variable is measured by the researcher. The experimental group receives the treatment. The control group does not receive the treatment. Random assignment means participants are placed into groups randomly. In a single blind study, participants do not know if they receive the treatment. In a double-blind study, neither participants nor researchers know. Ethics are also important in psychological research. Informed consent means participants understand the study before participating. Confidentiality means protecting private information. The right to withdraw means participants can leave at any time. Deception is only allowed when necessary and must be explained afterward. Now, let's talk about learning. Classical conditioning was studied by Ivan Pavlov. It is learning through association between stimuli. The unconditioned stimulus naturally produces a response, for example, food. The unconditioned response is an automatic reaction, for example, salivation. The conditioned stimulus is a neutral stimulus that becomes meaningful, for example, a bell. The conditioned response is the learned reaction, for example, salivation after hearing the bell. Classical conditioning has different processes. Acquisition is learning the association. Extinction happens when the learned response disappears. Spontaneous. Recovery happens when the response returns after some time. Generalization happens when people respond to similar stimuli. Discrimination happens when people respond only to a specific stimulus. John Watson's Little Albert experiment showed that fear can be learned. A loud noise was paired with a white rat, and Albert learned to fear the rat. Now, let's review operant conditioning. Operant conditioning was developed by B.F. Skinner. It explains learning through consequences. In Skinner's box, animals learned behaviors through rewards. For example, a rat presses a lever and receives food. Thorndike's law of effect explains that behaviors followed by satisfying consequences become stronger. Behaviors followed by negative consequences become weaker. Reinforcement increases behavior. Positive reinforcement adds something pleasant. Negative reinforcement removes something unpleasant. Remember, negative reinforcement increases behavior. Punishment decreases behavior. Learning is also influenced by motivation, attention, practice, feedback, and previous knowledge. Complex skills require breaking tasks into smaller steps, practicing, receiving feedback, repeating, and staying motivated. Albert Bandura explained learning through observation and imitation. This is called modeling. The Bobo doll experiment showed that children can learn aggressive behaviors by watching others. Modeling requires observation and imitation. Important. Concepts include repetition, reinforcement, and disinhibition. Disinhibition happens when someone does something they previously avoided after seeing others do it safely. Finally, remember the most important psychologists. Wundt created the first psychology laboratory and developed structuralism. James and Dewey developed functionalism. Watson developed behaviorism and studied Little Albert. Skinner developed operant conditioning. Freud created psychoanalysis. Pavlov studied classical conditioning. Thorndike created the law of effect. Bandura studied modeling and the Bobo doll experiment. Hippocrates connected biology with behavior. Before your exam, remember these key ideas. Psychology studies behavior and mental processes. Correlation does not equal causation. Negative reinforcement increases behavior. Punishment decreases behavior. Classical conditioning is learning through associations. Operant conditioning is learning through consequences. Modeling happens through observing and imitating. A double-blind study means that both researchers and participants do not know who receives the treatment. Good luck on your psychology partial 1.